First, I want to take a minute and, again, thank all the listeners. We really appreciate you guys listening, and thanks so much for coming out. Also, special thanks to our sponsors. Thank you again to Brooklyn Brewery. Great partnership with you guys through this. Visa Signature. Bobby Vans, I mean, this is a fantastic room. I think, it impresses me every time I walk in. And, of course, special thanks to the Long Island Ducks for making all of this happen. So, guys, thanks so much for coming out. I'd like to welcome up our first host. He unfortunately cannot stay the entire time because he's got to get back to the station and get on the air. He's the co-host of the Michael Kay Show. He's our host of Jets Game Day. He's the #1 hockey fan in New York City. Please give your hands warm welcome, Don LaGreca, Donnie Pucks.
I was just talking to our guest about the time he spent in Montreal at the Forum, watching the old Montreal Canadiens play. I always work a hockey angle, always. Thanks for coming out today. Our next guest is somebody that's very near and dear to any Met fan's heart. In 1984, the Mets started coming out of the clouds a little bit. They started moving forward. They acquired Keith Hernandez, young Darryl Strawberry is on the team, and they finished in second place to the Chicago Cubs, but they needed something extra. They just didn't have enough to get over the hump going into the '85 season. And I remember talking to my dad about some of the things that they could acquire or try to get better. And we batted a couple of names around. But this particular name never came up because it didn't seem like it was ever feasible. And I remember watching Monday Night Football. The Dolphins were taking on the New England Patriots, and Howard Cosell said that the New York Mets have just acquired Gary Carter from the Montreal Expos. And I realized that the dreams can come true. And opening day against the St. Louis Cardinals, Gary had a home run. Well, they came up short in '85, but it all crystallized in 1986, and a lot of it had to do with what Gary Carter was able to bring to the table, stabilized the catching position, made the pitchers better, big-time clutch hitter. It's my pleasure to welcome Hall of Famer Gary Carter. Gary is also now the manager of the Long Island Ducks, and as I said, we've got time constraints, but Brandon Tierney is going to have the pleasure of getting a chance to interview Gary. Of course, Brandon Tierney is on Monday through Friday between the hours of 10 and noon and does a lot of work also for SNY, the Wheelhouse. Even though he's a Yankee fan, Brandon Tierney is going to have a chance to talk to one of the greatest catchers of all time, Gary Carter. Brandon Tierney.
Thanks, man. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. How's everybody doing today? Pretty good? By the way, way too formal. Sit down, kid.
All right. You got it.
Those knees have to be barking a bit.
They are.
How are you, Gary?
I'm doing great, Brandon. And thank you for that introduction, Don. I know you got to run off and do the Michael Kay Show, so I appreciate you being here too, bud.
And the best part about that, Gary, is that he truly is a Mets fan. Growing up, still is, which I think is one of the cool things about Don. A lot of people that do what we do at this point, you kind of suffocate who you root for. Right. Don doesn't. So when you come over and you hit that home run off of Neil Allen, which, by the way, talk about
just
a weak
curveball,
right?
I know.
Donnie was going nuts jumping on his bed. He really enjoyed that moment.
Well, it was a thrill, and it was a nice way to be welcomed into New York. I know it surprised a lot of people when that December 10th announcement came out on Monday Night Football. And it was a great new beginning for me to come to New York and to be welcomed in that capacity, to hit that walk-off home run against Neil Allen, and then hearing the fans chanting my name on the way out of the turnstiles was quite exciting for me.
Before we delve a little deeper into the Mets and what you do with the Ducks now and just a general run through baseball, I'm curious, Gary, when you're in Montreal in '74, you come up.
Right.
What is it like, not at the stadium, because you guys had some pretty good teams with Raines and Dawson, Al Oliver, you guys could play, but the fan reaction, the reception, baseball in Montreal, what was that even like?
Well, it was different than obviously playing in the States. I think that the fans in Montreal really were good fans, and unfortunately we never won. And the only feather that we had in our hats was the 1981 League Championship Series against the Dodgers, which we ultimately ended up losing. But as far as talent coming through the minor league system, the likes of the players that you mentioned, Tim Raines, Andre Dawson, Larry Parrish, all the pitchers, Bill Gullickson, Charlie Lee, David Palmer, Scott Sanderson, Steve Rogers, all these guys. And the unfortunate thing was that, first of all, my first 2 years we played in Jerry Park. It was really not a big league facility. Then we moved into Olympic Stadium, and they never covered it until I left. All right, so we played 8 years in that facility through 1984, and I really believe the weather was what was a factor in the reason why we didn't win. In 1979, we lost out to the We Are Family Pirates by 2 games. The next year, we lost out to the Phillies by 1 game. Then the strike-shortened season, and we did win the second half and beat the Phillies in the mini-series, and then went to play the Dodgers in that league championship series. And then 1982, they started rechanging and revamping the team. They traded Larry Parrish away for Al Oliver, and we just didn't have the same makeup. And again, we had a lot of talent in that organization, but never did win. Then when the 90s came along, and then finally in 1994, when they had the best record in baseball, and then the strike ended the season. There was no playoffs, no World Series that year. That was the demise of the Expos organization. They had to let go of 4 key players, John Wetland, Kenny Hill, Marquise Grissom, and Larry Walker. And I think the fans just really got to the point where they realized that the Expos did not have the financial resources. They were not going to be able to maintain the key players, and that's where they lost faith. And I think that's the reason why ultimately they were eventually moved to Washington.
So you come to the Mets, and it's an interesting combination. The blossoming young talent, especially on the hill with Doc and El Cid and some of the young arms, and some already established veterans with Keith over at first base and some wild, quirky characters. Your first impression when you walk in and meet the guys, what is that all about?
Well, there was an impression, obviously, because I thought there was a lot of talent in the room. And when I remember seeing Keith Hernandez in St. Louis, and then here he is a member of the Mets, to me he was one of the best first basemen that I ever played with. And then looking at the other talent, obviously Darryl Strawberry, who was Rookie of the Year in '84, Doc Gooden, no, I had that wrong. It was Darryl was 83.
Correct.
Doc was 84. And then just knowing the pitching talent, even facing them the year before, I knew Ron Darling, and then obviously El Cid, like you mentioned, Sid Fernandez, and then Doc Gooden. And I just look forward to that opportunity of not only catching those guys, but just being in the same clubhouse with those guys. And it was just exhilarating because I felt like we were on the verge of really having something special and winning. And then, of course, in 1985, having the pleasure of catching Doc Gooden in his Cy Young Award year, where he was 24-4 with a 1.53 ERA and had 268 strikeouts. And I said, this guy's got no-hit stuff every time he takes the mound. And, you know, we unfortunately didn't win in stengle. There was a lot of expectations, but then in '86, it was a dream season. I mean, when we went to spring training at at Stengel Huggins Field in St. Petersburg, there was just that feeling in the clubhouse that this was our year. And certainly it turned out to be that way. 108 regular season victories, then that hard-fought series against the Houston Astros, and then which I still think was the best league championship series of all time.
There you go. I don't think many people disagree with that.
And then, of course, the World Series, and everybody remembers that because we just came back in so many dramatic ways, and especially Game 6. And yes, I do still send Bill Buckner a Christmas card every year.
Does he send one back?
No, I'm kidding. But no, really, Brandon, I mean, it was just an unbelievable season, and then especially the way we came back in the series. I mean, after dropping the first 2 games, we were an exhausted team. And I think one of the keys was when Davey Johnson told us to go to the hotel room, not come out for the practice or meet with the media or anything, just rest and come back and be refreshed. And we were. And Lenny Dykstra started off Game 3 with a home run off of Oil Can Boyd.
The pesky pole.
Exactly.
Yep.
And then it was just gangbusters after that. We won the next 2 games, and we tied the series. And Bruce Hurst was probably a better pitcher that series than Roger Clemens was. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget when I got that hit to left field in Game 6 to start the rally. They had flashed up on the board, "Congratulations, Red Sox, world champions." Yes. I'm glad you were there because they fired the scoreboard up. No, I'm kidding.
Still bitter, huh, buddy?
when that happened, I did not see it. I was just told about that later, and it just was a spark. And because we were the cardiac kids all year, that we just knew that we were a team of destiny, and it was just going to turn out for the best for us.
Along the way, Gary, the thing that jumps out, if you say 86 Mets, you say championship, and then you say fights. I mean, those are the two things that jump out. I mean, Met fans, am I right or wrong? This team threw down a lot. This team was not scared to mix it up, whether it's with Eric Davis at third base, whether it's the Dodgers with Tom Niedenfuer. I mean, you guys fought. And I always thought it galvanized the fan base, but as a team as well, I think, and you tell me, that mentality, Gary, really played itself out in the Astros series, in the Red Sox series. You never thought you were going to lose, and you would never go down fighting.
Well, that's it. I mean,
fighting, I should say.
Exactly. But I mean, Brandon, you're absolutely right. I mean, the enforcer on the team that year had to be Kevin Mitchell, and nobody wanted to mess with Mitch. And I'll never forget when Bill Robinson confronted Rick Rhoden in Pittsburgh. And, told him that he was cheating. And he knew because they were teammates at one time. And as it turned out, Rick Rhoden started yelling and cursing at him and everything else. And then next thing you know, both benches empty. And here's Kevin Mitchell. He's got a hold of Sammy Khalifa, and he's choking him, and he's turning purple, and then, of course, you mentioned the Eric Davis incident. I mean, he did a pop-up slide, and you don't mess with Ray Knight. He was a Gold Glove boxer when he was growing up, and Eric said something to him or whatever, and Ray just popped him. And, we were a team that, we were a cast of characters. I'm sure a lot of you have read about some of the things that transpired off the field, but nevertheless, when we came to the field and we crossed those white lines, we were the best team. Mm-hmm. And everybody loved to hate the Mets. They really did. And unfortunately, for all the other teams' sake, when we went into every series, we felt we were going to win. Mm-hmm. And that was the reason why we had 108 victories.
Absolutely. I just want to reset for everybody watching right now on 1050ESPN.com. We're here at Bobby Van Steakhouse. Of course, Hall of Famer Gary Carter is with me, and Long Island Duck skipper. We'll get to that, I promise.
Okay.
One thing, Gary, we hear often that Davey Johnson was the perfect manager for that combination of talent and personalities. Yeah. That seems fair on the surface, right?
Agreed, yes.
However, you can also say maybe because of his style, maybe, I don't want to use the word prevent, but maybe it didn't lend itself to sustaining success.
Well, that
makes sense.
Yes, I say yes and no, because we should have won in 1988.
Oh, no question.
And when Mike Scioscia hit that home run off a Doc in Game 4, that turned the whole series around. And unfortunately, we lost in a very rain-soaked, cold Game 5 at Shea, where Kirk Gibson made that tremendous catch in left field after slipping and falling, and then, of course, he hurt himself so bad he wasn't able to play after that, and hit that dramatic home run in Game 1, I think, in the World Series, off of Dennis Eckersley. But the thing is that series should have been won. We beat the Dodgers 11 out of 12 times during the regular season. I wouldn't say Davey was ever complacent at any time, but he was a player's manager, and he was always encouraging us, and he was always looking out for our own good. And, the front office has their ways, and when there was that situation that happened with the plane getting messed up when we came back from Houston, the Mets wanted to charge all of us and take it out of our salaries, and Davey said, no, that's not going to happen. So he always protected the players. I'm just saying that's one incident. And I don't think it really kept us from winning. I think it was just a thing where it was his style, and it was a good style. It's just that we should have won more than just one World Series.
Curious, Gary, just to follow up when you come here, the time that you spend in Montreal, All-Star, Silver, multiple-time, 11-time All-Star, by the way, Gary. Silver Sluggers, just a litany of awards and accomplishments. But when you get here, you know that you're on the other end of a career. Right. You had 2 good years in 85 and 86.
Right.
Then the numbers start dropping. Personally, were you ever frustrated that just as you got to this stage, the knees were going, the skills were eroding a bit? Did you have to deal with that at all?
Yes. More so my last year in New York when I had surgery on my knee. I had 8 loose bodies and 2 synovial cysts and missed 10 weeks. And then the press jumped on the bandwagon and thought my career was over, and it was coming closer to the end, but I still felt I had some good years left, which I ended up doing because I rehabbed the knee that winter and then went and played for the Giants and had a good year in 1990.
The uniform didn't look right, though. Let's be
No,
honest.
it didn't.
Come on now.
No,
Neither
I
did the
agree.
Dodgers uniform after
No,
that.
and then finished up back in Montreal. And you're right, my knees were bothering me, and it affected my swing. I altered my swing. I was more of an upright front foot type hitter then after that. And I didn't have the power generated that I had all those years before with my legs. The first 2 years that you mentioned were good years here in New York, and then 1987 I had 20 home runs and 83 RBIs, but the next year I fell off dramatically, and in the month of April I had a good April, 7 home runs, 15 RBIs, and then I only had 4 home runs the rest of the year.
Well, you really know these stats there,
Well,
Mr. Carter. BaseballReference.com.
When you come to statistics, I mean my pitching coach Dave Lapointe and my other coach Kevin Baez, they'll know how I am about looking at stats and knowing those kind of things. And I've always been into it that way because it really does help even putting lineups together now as a manager. Statistically, if you see how a guy does across the board with runners in scoring position, leadoff hitters, things like that, sure, and you just remember those numbers. Now, I'm a far cry from what Pete Rose is because Pete knows every statistic, and Pete, God bless him, is I think one of the great players of all time, and it's unfortunate he's not in the Hall of Fame.
As a manager, Gary, it's widely said, and I guess it makes some sense when you look at the elite managers now. La Russa,
right,
even Buck Showalter years ago didn't play in the bigs, was a minor league guy for a while. They say that superstars don't really transition as easily because they can't relate to the guy who struggles.
Right.
You seem to relate to the guys who struggle.
Well, I do, and I have more of an appreciation, I think, for that. And, I think that my style is maybe different than the Ted Williamses or some of the other, or Frank Robinson, ones that were tremendous players. I mean, Ted Williams and Frank Robinson, I think, are some of the greats of all time. And maybe they didn't relate to their players quite the same way, but I have an appreciation and an affection for the players that somewhat struggle, but try to encourage them and, let them, get into their own way of playing rather than saying, well, you got to play like this and you got to play better than that and so forth and so on. We've got some players on our team with the Ducks that never have been given really the true opportunity. We've tried to do that this year, and some of them have come through. But, I think that if you care about a player, I think that really shows more to the player than just having them as another player on the team, another number. And that's what we've tried to do as a team, is to encourage these guys. And I still feel that we're going to win this season. It's in the 10-year anniversary of the Ducks, and I'm very happy to be back in New York. And the fans at Citibank Park have been wonderful and have welcomed me back with open arms. And that's my position now. We'll see where it leads to in the future.
You strike me more as a nurturer as opposed to like an Earl Weaver, Billy Martin type who's going to slam the door in your face. You probably talk to these kids. Open door policy?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I've always had it that way. Even in the other years that I managed, the couple of years in the Mets organization last year out in Orange County with the Flyers, and also an independent league, and have won a couple of championships, and it's been rewarding in that capacity. And nothing would be greater than to get someday the opportunity of managing a big league club and leading them to a World Series. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's going to happen, though, Brandon. I'm finding out more and more how political this game is and how different managers' choices are made through organizations. And I don't know if they want a Hall of Famer around. Maybe I'm more of a threat to some organizations. I don't know.
Do you think age is a factor? Not to make you out to be old,
no,
Gary, but
no, I'm young.
I'm just asking. You think about the way the game is.
I know that the game has changed in that capacity, and yes, they are hiring younger managers. I mean, that's evidence of A.J. Hinch with the Diamondbacks, who had no managerial experience and no coaching experience, and they gave him a 4-year contract, and he's the youngest manager now. I think he's, 32?
And was a big disappointment. He was the top pick coming out of Stanford. He was supposed to be a star that
big
kid.
time. And then, of course, the Nationals had hired Manny Acta, and there's others that are younger, and I understand that, but the game is still the game, and it hasn't really changed. And I think that, I was told 42% of the managers last year in the major leagues were ex-catchers. And we have the best perspective of everything in front, and you realize all what's going on. Mind you, it's important to have good coaches around you, too. That's one thing that I'm very fortunate in having this year. I have 2 great coaches. Dave LaPointe is, I think, one of the best pitching coaches out there. He knows
Ex-Yankee.
Yes,
Ex-Yankee for a little
Yankee,
bit.
but
I remember when they signed him.
yeah,
I remember.
and he's been great for me. And Kevin Baez, God bless him, he throws batting practice every day. Without him, I don't know where my arm would be.
Hey, Kev, you went to Dominican, right? That's where you played collegiately? I remember that. Okay. Go ahead, Gary.
I think a success of a team not only comes from the manager, but also from his coaching staff. And again, we have a great coaching staff, and even Buddy Harrelson, who does all of our home games, doesn't go on the road, but is just very instrumental in making things happen for us at home, too.
You guys have a great facility as well. Gary, help us out with this. One of the things we discuss almost every day on the radio, the job rules. And
Right.
the evolution of young pitchers and what is dangerous territory,
Right.
limits, limits and incremental, tacking on, 20, 30 innings each year.
Right.
Where do you stand on that? And before you answer, a guy like Tom Seaver comes up when he's 22.
Right.
260 innings, 270, 290, 280.
Right.
He's fine. Do we overthink and coddle these young kids now?
Yes, to a certain degree. I think that there's a huge investment in them now that these monies and salaries have escalated to the heights that they have. I think it's more of a protection thing. And, this 100 pitch count that has become so evident in all of baseball. You talk to the Hall of Famers, and I was fortunate enough to attend this year's induction ceremony once again. And you talk to the old-time guys like the Robin Robertses and the Jim Bunnings.
Bob
and
Feller.
Bob Feller, oh, my God. Bob Feller. If he was given a contract, he'd go out and throw today.
Yeah.
The guy's unbelievable. But I think the game now has become a game of specialists. And it's really more so that you've got a setup guy, you've got or a middle guy, you've got a setup guy, and you've got a closer. And if they can get 5-6 innings out of a starter and not really burden him with more innings and put more stress on his arm, then they're going to go that route. And it's just the way the game has changed. I think the more you throw, the stronger your arm is. And in some cases, there's been a lot more injuries, more rotator cuff injuries, more shoulder injuries, more Tommy John surgeries. And a lot of that has transpired, and they figure because it's been an over-abuse of utilizing the arm. In a lot of other cases, we didn't have the strength and conditioning coaches that they have today. My gosh, I can't remember there ever being as many pulled groins or hamstrings or calf injuries and all, and that's all you hear about now. I don't know if they're maybe overdoing it for these players and going through the stretching that they do and then causing more injuries. But nevertheless, Brandon, I think that there's just more nowadays that they're on a pitch count and they're protecting their investment.
Something else that jumps out when you look at baseball at the grassroots level here, Gary, the great Dominican influence on the game right now. You go to you go anywhere in the Dominican, and I had a chance to play there years ago myself. You go to a sandlot, they're using milk cartons and broken down broomsticks. The American kid right now grows up through high school, through college with a piece of metal.
Right.
Then he gets drafted, and they say, okay, here's $5 million. But you have to now transition to wood.
Right.
Outside of the cost factor, what is preventing the United States and all the different the layers of baseball moving to wooden bats for American kids?
That's a great question, and I don't know why that they changed that some years ago in college. I think, for one thing, it's a cost-effective thing. I know in high schools, you don't have to keep buying a lot of wood bats because you got the same metal bat or aluminum bat that you can use throughout the whole year. college, I don't understand it, especially real strong Division I teams that
got
can
the budget,
afford it.
sure.
They've got the budget, they got the money. But the transition for a lot of the college players to go from the metal bat to the wood bat is quite the transition, especially they find out in a big hurry that, you know, getting jammed, they're going to break the bat. And I agree that they should change that, because there's a lot of those players that go and play summer leagues and wood bat leagues, and it's beneficial to them somewhat. But I think it's just because of the cost efficient thing, and I really would like to see them get away from the aluminum and go wood back again. But I think that also they're saying that it's to stay away from any kind of injuries, you know, that a broken bat can cause. Well, that's a fallacy, because Jim Darby with Easton told me that there's less injuries with aluminum bats than there are with wood bats.
Really?
Yes.
But he said it, but could he prove it?
He could prove it too. Absolutely. So that's why I'm saying that, you know, it makes sense. But to put metal bats at the major league level would be, I think, a very serious matter, because of how hard balls are hit back to, say, the pitchers, and there has been some pretty serious injuries of line drives going back to the pitcher. It would affect them, you know. So I don't think aluminum bats will ever be allowed in professional baseball.
That's Hall of Famer Gary Carter. If you're watching now on 1050ESPN.com, we're live in Bobby Van's downtown Wall Street area, and of course we do this every couple of weeks, a lunch with a legend, and really just to restate what Don said at the outset. It's a chance for us to kind of reach out to the advertisers who have been with us for a while, remain with us, you know, bring some listeners, and it's more intimate. It's something that we take a lot of pride in, and quite frankly, something that one of the better things that I think that we do at the station. So it's great to have you here, Gary. I want to ask you this too. Let's take one lefty and one righty, all right? You're in the prime of your career. You're 27. You're feeling spry. You're blocking balls. You're legging out. Not many, you know, infield hits because you hit the heck out of it. But you're cruising around the bases. You're humming BBs down to second. You can catch one lefty in their prime and one righty in their prime. Who are the two guys you would want to catch in the history of the game?
In the history of the game, well, I still have to go back to Doc Gooden in that Cy Young Award year. He was pretty phenomenal. I would have loved to have had the opportunity of catching a full season, maybe with Tom Seaver. And from a lefty standpoint, I would have liked to have caught Steve Carlton.
More than Sandy Koufax, huh?
Well, Steve Carlton was in my time. I mean, should I say Sandy Koufax? Yeah, I would have loved to have caught Sandy, but he wasn't in my time. If you're saying, you know, we can go back years and years, I would have loved to have caught Cy Young, you know? I mean, you know, but modern day, those were the guys. I mean, I faced Tom Seaver and I faced Steve Carlton. I never faced Sandy Koufax. I mean, another guy would have been somebody like Juan Marichal, you know, Bob Feller. You know, Bob Feller supposedly had the most velocity, or the miles per hour best fastball, when they had a motorcycle go 100 miles an hour, and he threw it through some, I don't know, canvas or something like that.
Sounds very sophisticated.
Well, yeah, very sophisticated, but that's the way they clocked them back then. Now you got the radar guns and everything. So, I mean, there would have been a lot of guys I would have loved to have caught. In my era, again, I had that pleasure of catching Doc Gooden. I would have liked to have, I was a big Dodger fan growing up in Southern California. I would have liked to have caught Don Drysdale, too. But, you know, since I didn't have that luxury, Seaver was in my time, and Carlton also in my time. Those would have been two guys I would have liked to have had the opportunity.
I don't think this was something I was going to ask you coming in, but it jumped out as you ran down some of the names. A lot of the players you mentioned, Gary, Marichal had a funky windup,
right?
And then, you know, things kick in. Rod Carew with a very unique stance,
right?
It seems like today's players, I don't want to say homogenized, but it's more uniform. There's more of a set way to go about trying to execute a pitch or a swing, and a lot of the, you know, unique characteristics of the game of the players individually, it's not the same. It doesn't look the same.
Well, it's a little bit more sophisticated, I guess, and more computerized, because guys have the luxury of going in and watching video. One of the first guys that really made claim to studying his, I think his everyday swing was probably Tony Gwynn. And to me, in my era, he was probably the purest hitter. had 8 batting titles, and and then you mentioned about Rod Carew. Obviously, Rod Carew had a lot of great career hits, and hit over 3,000 hits like Tony Gwynn did, and won a couple of batting titles and MVPs and stuff like that. But I think it's more detailed, and whereas it used to be see the ball, hit the ball.
Absolutely.
Now they're you've got spray sheets, you've got all
Hot
these
zones,
yeah,
cold zones,
yeah, all these different things.
tendencies.
Exactly, and I think it's more sophisticated in that regard, rather than just going out there and sometimes even playing with instincts and your gut, kind of like managing the same thing. When I'm coaching third base here for the Ducks, a lot of the times I'm playing the game, coaching third base, so I get a feel for when something should be put on to make something happen.
Gary, final thing, and we all know how the World Series wraps up. You guys win it in '86, and we ran through that a little bit. But as you get the rally going with 2 outs, nobody on, half a foot in the grave, and a whole city about to to wallow in their alcohol and their misery that night. As you go to the bat rack, because we've heard things. Hernandez is smoking a cigarette. This guy has his pants off. What is that's half the story. What is that dugout like from an emotional point of view?
Well, it was pretty silent, I can say that, and everybody just thought it was over. I mean, Davey Johnson, there was a shot of him on the video where he just kind of sunk down into the bench and just kind of hit hard on the back of the cushion, and took a big breath and just goes, I can't believe what's happening. But we were the cardiac kids, and like I said, when I came to the plate, I just didn't want to be a trivia question, But no, seriously, I came up there and I just felt a great deal of confidence. And Kevin Mitchell, who you mentioned was in the clubhouse and half undressed, he came out and then he got the hit. Then Ray Knight, he came to bat, and I know how Ray was all year. I mean, he was a fighter, and literally, and nevertheless, he came through and drove me in, and then Kevin Mitchell went to third. And when that all transpired, there was something that a lot of people forget about. John McLemore came out, made the pitching change, brought in Bob Stanley, who was a longtime reliever for the Red Sox and had the most saves at that time. Most of the time, he would replace Bill Buckner with Dave Stapleton, and he didn't do that. He wanted to have him on the field thinking he was deserving because he gutted it out all year with that bad ankle. Well, that was his mistake, because then Stanley threw the wild pitch, Kevin Mitchell scored, and I'm thinking, hey, we're going back out for extra innings, just like we did in Houston when we went 16 innings. And then a few pitches later, Mookie hits this ball down the first baseline and goes through Buckner's legs. And when Ray Knight scored, the momentum had totally swung back our way. And we were rained out, if you remember, on Sunday for Game 7, and we played on Monday. And we were down 3-0 after 5 innings. And a lot of people thought that it was still the Red Sox destiny. But we came back and won that game 8-5, and the rest is history.
It is one of the most compelling, unique, amazing chapters, and certainly in New York sports history. I mean, it was just a great team and great fondness. I mean, I remember that was I was 13.
Right.
And admittedly, Yankee fan, always have and always will. I gravitated to that team because you guys were just so awesome to watch. How could you not, man?
Right.
That was great stuff.
Well,
Gary.
we captured the city that year. We probably had most of the back pages on most of the newspapers, and it was just an electrifying year. And I'll never forget going down Broadway on the ticker tape parade, and 2.5 million people were throwing confetti and just about everything else at us. And that was one of the most exhilarating feelings I've ever had in my entire life.
Well, Gary, awesome to have you come down here today.
Thank you.
Continued success with the Ducks out east. I'll be out there August 20th. I'm throwing out the first pitch. So
all right.
Can you get down and squat so I can throw a little cutter to you?
I can get down in the old time ways, not totally, but I'll get down and I'll catch your pitch. But I also wanted to thank Bobby Vans. Great meal that we had today, and hope all of you enjoyed the day as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, Gary the Kid Carter. Give it up, Gary. Outstanding show.